Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to talk a little bit about my first foray into the battlefield of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Picked it up a couple days ago. I put in about 4 or 5 hours at this point. I think I've played like 10 or 12 matches. I've made it in the top 10 a couple times. I made it in the top 3 twice. I've never become the winner of the chicken dinner, but I'm making my way there. What I have discovered along the way, though, is even though the game is in early access, and I do believe there are some things that could be changed, and, you know, obviously a lot of progress the development team can make going forward, there is still just something really special here. Battlegrounds is just, it's this absurd, super large-scale deathmatch. I mean, you could boil it down to that, and that would sound really not that appealing to a lot of people, but it's the way all of that falls into place. It's the way it's executed once you actually actively get into a match that makes Battlegrounds really special, at least if you're into the sort of Battle Royale, last man standing type experience. Now, I never really played Battle Royale when it was an Arma 3 mod, but I spent a lot of time playing Wasteland in the days of Arma 2. It was kind of the thing that my brother and I did. We poured thousands of hours into Wasteland, and while that was also AI driven, there was still a huge focus on PvP. And I can remember fondly late nights into very early mornings where my brother and I were just grinding for guns and gear and building our own little bases inside of Wasteland servers and then heading out to hunt down other teams and other player-made factions. It was this outstanding experience, and one that was equally rewarding and frustrating. And there's bits and pieces of that in Battlegrounds, but the one thing about Wasteland was that it wasn't really well structured. You were just playing on private servers, anyone could be there, there were a lot of cheaters. It wasn't obviously anything more than a mod at the end of the day. Most of that game, probably 80% of it, was spent just aimlessly walking or driving around and gathering equipment. And more often than not, you'd stumble upon somebody and get killed and then just do it all over again. It was maybe 20% action. Battlegrounds is a little bit more well balanced. There still is that element of luck or randomness, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. But it feels like a more balanced experience in terms of how much time I spend looting things, walking around or driving, and then actually engaging other players. Of course, one of the big mechanics that allows for this is the circle of death. So matches really are set to last a limited amount of time. You know, they can fluctuate a couple minutes here and there, but for the most part, you're looking at around like 30 minutes, I think, 20 to 30 minutes for a match, because that circle of death is always closing in and pushing players to one position on the map. You also have a lot of choice in Battlegrounds, which is, it's kind of the theme of Battlegrounds is player decision making. Constant decision making. Do I go left? Do I go right? Do I go into that building? Do I go out of that building? Do I walk around with this weapon equipped or that weapon equipped? And it all starts at the very beginning of the match when you jump out of a plane. You can parachute out whenever you want, so you can go into a city where there's probably more people, you can go into a small farm location. There's just a lot of choice right from the beginning of Battlegrounds, and I think that's a big part of what makes it so enjoyable. I think for a Battle Royale style game, it would be very easy for many people, myself included, especially when I've dealt with Battle Royale games in the past like H1Z1's King of the Kill, where the frustration, you know, it wasn't really ever worth the reward. I just didn't really care for how the game's mechanics played out in King of the Kill, and I never ended up playing that much of it, especially as a solo player. And that's all I've played at Battlegrounds so far is solo queue stuff. Now, honestly, I could talk about Battlegrounds and its mechanics for days on end. There's so much within the game that may seem simple, but really adds to the experience. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time today just talking about my first-hand experience with it over the last 4 hours. The things that I've learned, the struggles I've dealt with, and more importantly, the room I have to grow. That's one of the things I really love about Battlegrounds, is it immediately feels like a game where there's a lot to learn as an individual, a lot that you can do to increase your chances of success, even if it's not a chance of complete victory, just your chance of doing better round to round to round to round, making sure that each and every firefight you have, you put up the best you got, and if you come out on the other side, dead or alive, it was still a good time. So I've been through a lot in Battlegrounds at this point, and I really made sure to avoid looking at any guides or tutorials before I headed into Battlegrounds. I wanted it to be pretty much a blind experience. I had seen other people play it, I knew the basic concept of it, but I didn't want to know all of the juicy bits. I didn't want to know about spawn locations and potential spawn locations or this or that. I just wanted to look at my key bindings, head into solo, and then just see what could happen and see how long I could survive. In my first match, I killed 3 guys and then I died, and I was like 40th or something. And I immediately got a taste for the pacing of Battlegrounds, or at least the pace that I was going to have to play the game at if I wanted to do well. And I think that's one of the big factors in becoming a better Battlegrounds player, is understanding the pace at which you should be moving, or which you can move, to do well and to still, be a hunter. There are players out there who are going to get their first place victory with maybe 2 to 3 kills. A lot of it's just letting other people kill people, waiting for the right moment, and then striking. But there are other players that are hunters. These are people who are going to get 14, 15 kills a match and come out on top. So there are different ways to play the game, different ways to seek success, seek that first top place thing. The one thing I did notice early on, and I've actually been able to punish a lot of players for this, is that you can't really get away with hardcore camping. You might get 1 or 2 kills that way, but for the most part, the player that moves methodically, even if it is incredibly slow, is usually going to be able to outplay players like that. One of the most important things, and I call this like the sort of adult versus childhood mentality, right? As a kid, when you think about hiding from like a monster, or when you were scared, you thought about just going under the blankets. I don't need to see anything. I don't need to know what's going on. But as you get older, you recognize that you want to have control of the situation, or at least most of us probably do, and you want to be able to see what's going to happen. And that's one of the perspectives that I've taken on in Battlegrounds. It doesn't make so much sense to lock yourself in a room where you can only see out of one window. It makes a lot more sense to put yourself in great positioning to hear your enemies and to see your enemies before they can acquire you, even if that position has 360 degrees of view from somewhere. It's all about like maximizing your ability to identify a target while also minimizing your exposure. You don't want to just minimize exposure by putting yourself in a closet, because, well, this happens. These 2 guys hiding in the exact same building together. I don't even know if they were teaming or if they were just like waiting for me to open the door and see if they could get a shot off, but fortunately I had a shotgun. They didn't have very fast trigger fingers, and they both ended up dead. So that's the kind of situation that can happen in Battlegrounds when you camp. So that's something that I obviously wasn't too interested in that, but early on I was playing excessively aggressive. And considering that I don't know the maps, I don't fully understand the circle, there's a lot to do with its mechanics and the outer ring of it as it closes in, I've been kind of finding myself a nice medium pace. Now, the great thing about Battlegrounds, for the guys who don't play it, is that it kind of plays out like a sub-Arma experience when it comes to gunplay. It's not full-on Arma. A lot of these same ballistics are definitely featured. We do with bullet drop. You obviously have to lead targets, and when you have a map as big as this with so many players, you are going to be engaging targets at range, sometimes with iron sights, without optics, sometimes with optics. So there's a lot going on there. Fortunately, that's the one part of the game that I seem to pick up fairly quickly. I know that this isn't in the Arma engine. This isn't the the Arma 3 Battle Royale mod anymore. But I'd like to think that PlayerUnknown and the team at Bluehole have followed some of the bullet physics from Arma 3, because it feels very familiar. As someone who's played over 1,000 hours of Arma, I was able to pretty much, pick up the game and get a feel for weapon lead and bullet drop almost instantly. It felt like it was second nature for me, which meant early on I was able to get a lot of, quick kills. But more importantly, I think than any of that is how good how good Battlegrounds feels when you do finally get in those firefights. And they have the opportunity to happen really quite often. I'm really more into the idea at this point of having a couple intense firefights and dying than I am in not having any intense firefights and coming out on top. It's the one thing, right? It's a positive and a negative. When you create an open world this big and then throw all these players into it, there's a huge potential for the game to feel like it's a lot of chance and randomness, right? Like, oh, I ran around this whole time and then some dude with a sniper rifle picks me off as I'm crossing a field. There's definitely elements of that. You'll never, eliminate that completely. But I'd like to think of playing Battlegrounds in the same way that I think about driving a motorcycle or a car. A lot of people will tell you, oh, you're bound to get into an accident within the first year of your having a license. It's impossible to avoid all accidents. We can say that to a degree. Let's pretend that the smallest percentage scenario for getting in an accident is you sitting at a light somewhere stationary and someone hits you, right? If you are really aware when you're driving, if you're very aggressive and persistent in checking your mirrors and checking, what's that guy gonna do, really starting to get into the idea of predicting what another driver might do, you can put yourself in a situation where, yes, you avoid accidents for a very long time. I've been driving for 11 years now in motorcycles and on cars, and I have no accidents because I've always really been keen on looking ahead, trying to identify what someone else might do. It's a lot of the same here in Battlegrounds. You'll never completely get away from the getting hit by someone at a red light situation. You know, sometimes you'll just have to cross a field and there will be a guy in the other building who has a sniper rifle and there's not much you can do. But you can minimize that by taking a lot of consideration into how you move in Battlegrounds. Maybe you recognize that there is one window facing said field and you do your best to break line of sight with that window, even if it still means you're exposed. That's really Battlegrounds in a nutshell. It's all about positioning, you know, getting a feel for where someone could be and then countering that before it happens, even if it never happens. And I kind of like that. That element of risk and randomness that you may think would be the most annoying thing in the world, like, oh, getting sniped by a guy across the net. So it's really not. It's just something about the way Battle Royale works that allows you to be... It allows that to be a really intense driving force behind the gameplay. You know, part of what makes it so heart-pumping and breathtaking and adrenaline-pumping. And even after 12 matches now, I still jump into Battlegrounds and I start shaking. I'm like, okay, we just gotta get this decision right. And when things start to go your way, it's just really rewarding. Honestly, if you're into Battle Royale type games, I could not recommend Battlegrounds enough. It is sitting at $30 right now. It is still early access. They are dealing with some optimization issues. I know some people on lower end rigs not getting the best performance. I'm sitting here with an i7. I got a 4770K and my 1070. I actually played the game with no overclock to start just because I don't want any crashes. And I was getting, you know, it fluctuates from like 40 up to like 70 depending on where I am in the game world. So pretty consistent for me. If you're sitting with a similar rig, I think performance won't be too much of an issue. Now there's one thing that I did want to mention that really excites me, something that the Bluehole team is doing. And as they optimize the game, they're locking in certain graphical features. So before I started playing Battlegrounds, people were playing the game on the lowest setting for grass. So there would be no grass. So you couldn't actually hide in said grass, which I think is kind of lame. I never liked that in games. Fortunately, before I started playing, they pushed out a patch that forced grass even on the lowest settings because they finally optimized it. Well, they optimized it somewhat. Either way, I like the idea of them going forward, optimizing the game, and then forcing features like shadows to make sure that everybody is in the same playing field, and there's no reason to make your game look like it's running on a potato just to get a competitive edge. I want a game that looks pretty, that's also competitive and fair, and they look to be pushing towards that. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on Battlegrounds and playing a hell of a lot more of it. I know some other people like Halo Hat who have the game, so I might be able to get into some squad stuff. I think that would be dope. The best thing that you guys can do is leave a like, or let me know down in the comment section below if you'd like to see more Battlegrounds. Alongside of Titanfall 2, of course. That's it for me, guys. Any questions, any experiences of your own with Battlegrounds, I'd love to hear your stories. This is a game that definitely allows you to fabricate, to create, to live through some pretty fantastic video game stories. Feel free to share them. And as always, remember to play smart, remember to play to challenge yourself, but most importantly, remember to play for fun.